Welcome to the fourth annual Patient Group Pathway Model to Accessing Cancer Clinical Trials and Real-World Evidence Methodologies Conference. My name is Barry Stein, and I'm the President of Colorectal Cancer Canada, the host of today's conference. We are so pleased to have you join us from over a dozen countries around the world in such great numbers today. I hope you'll enjoy today's exciting conference. This year, we'll be presenting the finalized version of the Canadian Cancer Clinical Trial Stakeholder Charter, which aims to help govern the relationship between patient and patient groups with other cancer clinical trial stakeholders as set out in the Canadian version of the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative. It is our hope that the clinical trials stakeholders will adopt this charter to ensure the active participation of patients and patient groups in cancer clinical trials and the inclusion of patients' values and preferences. This year, our focus is on the evolution of cancer clinical trials in the era of precision medicine, underscoring how precision medicines impact patients, our regulatory, health technology assessment agencies, and value frameworks. If we are to have access to these new medicines, we must ensure that patients are incorporated in the ideation and design of clinical trials, consider new trial endpoints, and modernize our regulatory and HTA frameworks to allow for the inclusion of real-world evidence so that we can all benefit from the new and novel treatments targeted to the molecular profile of the individual patient. We are thrilled to have with us today an unparalleled international roster of multidisciplinary speakers with whom you will have the opportunity to interact throughout the course of the day. I will join you as well at different points in the conference as a discussant providing the patient perspective. I would like to thank all of our loyal sponsors who will be listed on the screen shortly, without whom this conference would never have been possible. I would like to thank our co-chairs, Dr. Winston Chung, Dr. Michael Duong, Dr. Stephanie Michaud, and Stephen Sundquist, not only for their hard work in connection with today's conference, but for the devotion to the cause and their outstanding work in between conferences, all of which has helped to enrich our program. I would also like to thank our medical writer, Dr. Natalie Ross, who produced our detailed report from last year's conference and who will be joining us today to ensure another excellent report. Finally, I would now like to introduce Anne-Marie Wright, our conference facilitator, who has done such terrific work over the course of all of our previous conferences. Anne-Marie will guide us through the events of the day and help animate the discussion as well. Enjoy the conference and see you soon. Anne-Marie?
Good morning. Yes, thank you, Barry, very much. Good morning, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie Wright, and it is my distinct honor and pleasure to be facilitating the this conference for the fourth year in a row. Working with the CCTC team this year to bring you today's conference has been an extraordinary journey given world events over the past number of months. So on behalf of the team, we're excited to bring you a very forward-thinking, progressive, dynamic content that we hope you'll engage with as we go. Barry mentioned that this conference has been constructed with the help of many, including some very profiled conference co-chairs, as well as a conference organizing committee consisting of a very strong team from CCTC, including Sarita, Carol, Elle, Magda, and Louise. We're here today in the studio of Resolve Collaboration. Like so many today, we're embracing the world of virtual platforms, and this platform we think is going to be extremely helpful to us today in terms of bringing you the kind of content that's necessary. So I'm going to move right into conference objectives, which are as follows. First and foremost, the goal of today is to acknowledge and share some of the evolutionary trends in the field of precision medicine, to provide insight into the dynamics of patient centricity and value-based care as adapted to new trial designs. Secondly, to discuss the evolution of cancer clinical trials in the area of precision medicine in both the Canadian and international context, as well as the development of new and novel initiatives to ensure patient access to clinical trials. Thirdly, to present the final version of the Canadian Clinical Trials Stakeholder Charter and to discuss the adoption implementation plan across all clinical trial stakeholders in Canada. I'm particularly excited about this objective for the conference as it's been developed. The Stakeholder Charter was an idea that came out of this conference 2 years ago. And fourthly, to continuously reinforce partnerships and collaboration between patients, patient groups, and all stakeholders who advocate for cancer clinical trials in Canada. Barry mentioned that it takes a village, and we are very, very grateful and appreciative of the many sponsors who support the organization and this conference specifically, some of whom are speaking today. So please acknowledge, as you can, these sponsorships on behalf of CCC. The value of having a virtual audience is tremendous. I think everybody on this call fundamentally understands and has experience now with participating in virtual conferences. It's been one of the most magnificent benefits of the world as it's changed over the past number of months. 73% of today's participants are actually first-time attendees. We have a record number of participants in this conference, and many of the folks are coming from all kinds of places across the world, including Mexico, Switzerland, Australia, Brazil, Serbia, France, and Great Britain. About 40% of our audience today is pharma, 28% is patient or patient group participants, and the balance is as you see on the slide. One of the questions that we had as we asked you to register for this conference was to tell us what your main goals were for attending. I'm not going to read all of them out, but I can tell you that just about everybody checked all of these goals. So there's a high desire, a high need for information and content of this nature, and the enthusiasm for which, for the work that CCC is doing here is very, very high. One of the things that I know that we're particularly happy about is that 85% of people want to be part of a virtual conference community. And I'm going to share a little bit with you how you can do that today. And so I'm going to move to a little bit of logistics just to help you understand how to best participate in today's session. So it's a big day. We've got from now until about 4:30 or so, there's 6 sessions. And we've got something very interesting this year because we've got so many very fine sponsors. We're running what I call commercial breaks or education sessions in between some of the sessions. That'll give you a chance to stand up and stretch as well. There's one morning break, 10-minute break, where we'll sign off for a little bit to allow you to go get a coffee. And then there's also one 30-minute lunch break. But most importantly, there's a poster session, which I'm going to continuously reinforce as we go. The agenda was sent out with your reminder email. But if for any chance that you don't have it with you today, I'm going to show you how to click on a resource button to get it, number one. And number two, you'll see a URL here. And this is for the colorectal cancer microsite, where all of this information is going to live. So speaker biographies, et cetera, will all be there if you need it. So let me help you answer a couple of questions that you might have on your mind. How do I ask a question? How do I connect with others? What happens if I get myself in trouble, technically speaking? So let's go through the screens a little bit just to give you guidance on what you're going to see today. This fundamentally, from a participant point of view, is what you're going to see. So the black screen here is really where the speaker is going to present. The speaker's slides are going to be on the side of that. We consistently will be acknowledging our sponsors throughout the day. And you'll see underneath the sponsor sign, there's a link that will take you to a survey. And again, I'm going to reinforce this link a few times today to suggest that One of the things that makes these conferences so successful year after year is the tremendously positive, good feedback that we get. So I'm going to encourage you, particularly as the day is over, to use this link and to go to the survey. Underneath the black screen, you're seeing a number of pictures, and those pictures are really our poster sessions. They will also give you a chance to click on those screens to connect to some of the commercials or videos that we've been running coming into this conference and that will continue to run today. They're very powerful messages, and we hope you'll take a second look at them. There's some buttons at the top of your screen. And I just want to review what these buttons are. They're pretty self-explanatory, especially for an audience of folks who is probably very, very savvy and has participated in these kinds of things in the past. But just as a reminder, the purple button is a chat button. We've got somebody here monitoring that chat. This is where you can reach out and connect with others, we hope. And so that chat will be recorded. If you have a desire to connect or understand who's on the participant list, please use the chat for that. Different from the chat is the questions. The questions, this is where to all of the panelists, to all of the speakers, you can ask virtually anything you like. We'll be monitoring that. Our goal today is to answer as many questions as we can, but there is absolute commitment to, if we cannot get to your question today, we will answer it after the session is over because we're keeping track of all of that. The little blue button with the arrow downward is the resource button, and there's some really great things there. There's the agenda, there's the program booklet, which includes all the biographies of the speakers, as well as a number of other important resources. The refresh button is fairly explanatory, but I just want to spend a moment on what I think is probably the most important button to people in these sessions is tech support. So please don't use the chat. Please don't use the question buttons for tech support. Resolve has got somebody full-time all the time taking care of all of us. So if you find that you've lost a connection or if something happens, please just push that tech support button and someone from Resolve will be right there to help you as you need. A couple of other housekeeping things is, as I mentioned, please, please, please ask questions. One of the things I know from having facilitated this for the last number of years is that there is a lot of questions that people want to have the dialogue. Please don't be shy because it's a virtual platform. Ask questions as we go. As I mentioned, whatever we can't get to today, we'll get to over the next couple of weeks. The last thing that we ask is that as you can, please stay for the end of the day. I won't say that we save the best for last, but there's a very, very important element of this conference, which is to gain your feedback, gain your input on the charter implementation plan that's been constructed here, that has been built with very fine input from folks who've attended this conference over the past couple of years. Finally, a note about post-conference. This webcast will be available within 24 to 48 hours to replay as you wish, going to exactly the same link. Also, colorectal cancer on their microsite will be hosting this webcast as things go forward. And as Barry mentioned, Natalie will be preparing a meeting report. I'm going to reinforce a couple of these messages as the time goes on, but just I know it's on people's mind that what happens with all of this material, so you'll be able to see it online afterwards. And the final thing I'm just going to leave up for a minute here is both Sarita and Carol's emails and telephone numbers, so that as you need and wish to reach out to the organization following this conference, I'm going to show this slide a couple of times. Please reach out to Sarita B at colorectalcancer.com and Carol B at colorectalcancer.com as well. Okay. So without further ado, we're going to get right into this morning's agenda. And there's actually two sessions this morning before we have a break. And I'm going to now introduce the first of those two sessions. The sessions, fundamentally, the format of these is going to run the same way. There'll be an introduction, there'll be speaker presentations, and then at the end of each presentation, there'll be a panel discussion. Feel free to ask your questions as the speakers are talking, but also as the panel is running. So we won't be interrupting the speakers with questions. We're saving it till the end. Having said that, these are facilitated panel discussions, and our very first panel is on is under the title of International Regulatory Collaboration in the Era of Precision Medicine. We have two speakers with us today, the first of which is Dr. Stein Lemery, who is the Acting Director of Division of Oncology 3, Office of Oncological Diseases at the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, FDA. In addition to duties regarding general drug development for patients with gastrointestinal malignancies and other cancers, Dr. Lemery has also focused on tissue agnostic development, precision medicine, and biosimilar development. Dr. Lemery completed his clinical training in hematology and medical oncology at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He has also graduated with a Master of Health Sciences in Clinical Research degree awarded by Duke University School of Medicine. Second speaker will be Melissa Hunt, who is currently the Director of the Therapeutic Products Director at Health Canada, having joined Health Canada in 2005. Prior to working at Health Canada, Melissa worked for several years within the pharmaceutical industry. At Health Canada, she held several positions, including the position of Director of the Bureau of Metabolism, Oncology, and Reproductive Sciences, which she has held since 2018. Melissa holds a Bachelor of Science in Life Sciences from Queen's University and a Master of Science in Pharmacology from the University of Toronto. The discussion for this session is Barry Stein from CCC. So, Stephen, I will now pass it over to you, who will pass it to Melissa and then to Barry in the panel.
Hello, I'm trying to click on the first slide. Let's see. Oh. Wait a minute. Sorry, having technical difficulty. My slide presentation just became, I think, your slide presentation, Mr. Stein. Oh, sorry, I think I got it. Figured it out. Okay. Now we're good? Can you hear me?
I think you're great, Stephen. You are great.
Okay, great. All right. Hello, my name is Stein Lemery, and it is a pleasure to be invited this morning to give an FDA perspective on international regulatory collaboration with respect to oncology drug development. I'm a medical oncologist by training and work within FDA's Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. My talk will be brief, and I will first give a little background on the oncology group within the FDA. I will then talk about international collaboration and Project Orbis to give a flavor of what efforts are ongoing within the different agencies. Okay. I appreciate the chance to give this talk to this Canadian audience. As background, my father is from Greenfield Park on the outskirts of Montreal. He met my mother, who came from a French-American family in northern Vermont and ultimately emigrated to the United States. Nevertheless, I remember visiting my grandparents who lived near what is now Hôpital Charles Lemoyne in Greenfield Park. I still remember my grandfather, who worked for the O'Keefe Beer Company, taking me to the Dairy Queen, which is the little red building on the top of the picture. I also remember my grandmother listening to every single Montreal Expos game on the radio, as well as trips to Olympic Stadium, getting to watch Tim Raines, Andre Dawson, and Gary Carter. I still have relatives who live both in the Montreal area as well as in Ontario and enjoy making trips to Canada from time to time. I don't think it's, got it. Anyway, I'm a medical oncologist who trained at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda before joining the FDA in 2006. I have spent much of my time at the FDA involved in the regulation of drugs for GI malignancies, including colorectal cancer. Like others who are in the audience, I'm also a patient. My own experience involved an approximate 3-month hospitalization for an aggressive lymphoma diagnosed in my small intestine. Although my cancer was different, I shared some of the same experiences. For example, your neuropathy is from oxaliplatin, mine was from vincristine. Although lymphoma is typically not a surgical disease, my bowel perforated twice, a dreaded complication in colorectal cancer, and I ultimately became a surgical patient. I'm sure, like many of you in the audience, anxiety and uncertainty are difficult to deal with. I have to face these today, and for what it's worth, I'm undergoing a CT scan for surveillance later today. I will now pivot to briefly describe the FDA and the Oncology Center of Excellence, or OCE. The OCE is a center that coordinates the review of products for patients with cancer across various centers within the FDA. I am involved in drug development, so I work in CDER, or the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. CBER, or the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research, reviews vaccines and cellular therapies, such as CAR T cells. CDRH, or the Center for Devices in Radiological Health, reviews both companion in vitro diagnostics, such as MSI or BRAF testing, as well as devices used to treat cancer, including radiation therapy, as well as beads that may be used, for example, in a TACE procedure. In addition to coordinating review of products, the OCE has important roles in advancing science, policy, and communication with external stakeholders, including patient groups such as yourselves. In the regulatory space, we review a drug from initial investigational new drug application, or IND submission, which may consist of the first-in-human trial, to safety reports, protocol amendments, pivotal trials, and expanded access or compassionate use. We also meet with companies with respect to the development plans and review applications for drug approval and information in the post-market setting. In the policy, engagement, and scientific space, we participate in many activities, including patient or professional society meetings, independent scientific work, writing guidance documents, and various workshops or mini symposia. We have about 100 medical oncologists at the FDA, as well as scientists, pharmacologists, and other allied health professionals to accomplish this work. The vision of the OCE has come about largely through the leadership of Dr. Pazder, who's pictured in this slide. He's the director of the OCE, who really has been the foremost voice within the agency for being forward-thinking and fostering fellow oncologists in the FDA to be leaders in the field of oncology. As part of this vision, he has fostered many projects or initiatives to advance the field. Today, we will be talking about Project Orbis. Before I talk about Project Orbis, though, it is important to highlight that we have had many interactions with international regulators in oncology for over 15 years, including Canada for at least 10 years. This is important because the reality is that drug development is a global process. There are things companies do, for example, to satisfy one regulatory body or even an HTA that may not be required by other regulatory health authorities. These interactions have included, with other regulators, have included monthly telephone conferences, face-to-face interactions at major meetings like ASCO, as well as occasional trips of staff to other regulatory bodies. For example, I have been to EMA to present at a meeting on tissue-agnostic drug development. My understanding was that a group from FDA was going to travel to Ontario. However, I believe the trip was canceled due to COVID. I want to make one final point on this slide in that we have confidentiality agreements between the partners with respect to information discussed at these meetings. This slide shows some of the benefits of international collaboration in drug development. When international standards can be agreed upon, this can streamline and reduce costs in drug development. When drugs are approved at the same time across the world, this can standardize the playing field for future trials. Finally, of course, this can result in faster trials. It is important to stress, though, that each regulatory authority operates under a different legal framework, and therefore there may be differences in approaches in different countries. In essence, for approval, FDA approves drugs for which substantial evidence of effectiveness exists that the drug will have the effect that it is purported to have, and that this effect is observed in adequate and well-controlled trials. Historically, this means that at least 2 trials were required. However, FDA has provided guidance on situations where flexibility may be warranted and approvals can be granted on packages that are less than 2 adequate and well-controlled trials, and this frequently is the case in oncology. Historically, in the past, approvals occurred in clinical trials designed to show improvements in overall survival, like the trial for TAS-102 or trifluridine tipiracil for patients with colorectal cancer on the left. In the past decade, however, we have seen instances with targeted therapies with extremely high response rates in rare settings, such as larotrectinib or entrectinib for NTRK-positive tumors, where it would be difficult to conduct randomized trials. Therefore, agencies such as FDA and Health Canada have accepted non-survival endpoints for approval when scientifically appropriate. For the larotrectinib approval on the right, not only did we see a very high response rate, but we saw a complete radiographic disappearance of tumors in some patients, as well as responses that lasted over 3 years in many of the patients. One final takeaway from this slide is that the trial necessary for approval may differ depending on the setting and context of the drug and indication. For the trial on the left, the drug probably could not have been approved without a randomized trial. The overall response rate was less than 5%, and is difficult to assess for effects on endpoints such as survival or PFS in the absence of randomization. This is because it is difficult to adjust for all the unknown factors to assess the drug's effect. On the other hand, tumors generally do not shrink in the absence of therapy. This allows for an assessment of anti-tumor effects based on many single-arm trials, such as the larotrectinib trial on the right. Both FDA and Health Canada have an expedited approval pathway with many similar elements. Hopefully, this slide is accurate with respect to the Canadian approach, as I tried to look on the web to get many of the points. Both apply to serious and life-threatening diseases, including cancer, and both are assessed in the context of available therapies. Although the Canadian approach can also consider surrogate endpoints, use of surrogate or intermediate endpoints are primary criteria described in our regulations. A reason for this is that our accelerated approval regulations stem from the AIDS epidemic, where CD4 counts and viral loads were being used as endpoints. Moving on to Project Orbis, this program was launched in 2019 and now consists of more than 5 countries, including Canada, and actually the UK recently signed on. This really was Dr. Pazder's idea, and if you know Dr. Pazder, he comes from a Polish-American family, and he thought of the name Project Orbis based on trips to Poland with his late wife, where Orbis was the large travel agency and hotel group within the country. Although the Orbis list is growing, at this time we don't see the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, as joining. This is due to the unique review process and schedule that the EMA has for drug applications, which would be difficult to incorporate. Additionally, in general, applications to the EMA have been submitted concurrently or shortly after submission to the FDA. This differs, though, for some of the Orbis countries or the other countries, including some of the Orbis partners, where applications are sometimes submitted a year or more after submission to the FDA. This slide describes the process of application selection for Project Orbis. One of the important factors is that all the partners have the bandwidth to participate in the program, which may involve additional meetings. Given differences in time zones between partners, this tends to result in very early or very late meetings for the participants. Similarly, drug companies may vary in their resources to facilitate submission of applications to multiple jurisdictions at the same time. This may especially be true for smaller companies. This slide shows that the program has been in existence for slightly more than a year, with the first approval occurring less than a year ago. Oops. That slide does. As mentioned in the prior slide, we generally have multi-country telephone conferences during the review of these applications. In my experience, I have found that the different perspectives of each country to be valuable and has, for example, facilitated better information and labeling to facilitate patient use of the drug. At the end of the day, each country retains full independence in regulatory decision-making as well as in labeling negotiations. Importantly, the program allows flexibility in the timing of submissions. In some cases, it may take a few additional sponsors to submit to Orbis partners. In these cases, we can have a modified approach where the program still allows for the application to be submitted earlier to Orbis partners, even though the actions on the application are not taken concurrently. This is especially important because FDA has a program called RTOR, where we can receive data sets prior to the submission of an application, which may facilitate an even earlier review on our part. One example of an application that was submitted as Project Orbis is pembrolizumab for the first-line treatment of MSI-high colorectal cancer. This is an application that we approved this year as we had early access to the data sets. Again, I stress, however, that Orbis does not require simultaneous submissions or actions on these drugs, and there may be valid reasons why actions may be taken on different dates, including differences in the timing of submissions as well as resources of the regulatory authorities. As an update, we are on track to have over 100 marketing application submissions across the globe by the end of this year. I do think the program has been successful so far. Again, it is important to stress that these submissions are resource intensive for both regulatory health authorities as well as applicants. At least in the near future, I see an increased number of submissions via the Orbis process. Given the increasing collaboration, it only makes sense that we will have more interactions with respect to policy. So far, the interactions have been solely with regulatory bodies and not health technology assessment bodies. Clearly, reimbursement of these drugs is complicated and each country has to make their own decisions. With respect to pre-market collaboration, FDA does have a process with the European Agency for joint advice for sponsored meetings. However, it does take a lot of resources to facilitate these, and we do not receive a lot of requests from sponsors to hold these meetings. I would like to conclude that today, I would say interactions with Canada have been successful and hopefully we can continue in the future and maybe expand to other areas of drug development. Completely off topic, maybe we can extend Orbis to other areas. For example, if we can get one good place in Rockville, Maryland, my hometown, that sells good smoked meat and Montreal-style bagels, it would be most appreciated. I thank you very much for inviting me to this great conference, and I'm looking forward to the question and answer section. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, very much. Melissa, would you like to begin? Please let us know if you need help with your slides.
Sure, I'm just waiting to see myself. Oh, there I am, and I'll see if I can get this working. I'm on my slide, and yet nothing is happening. Sorry, I'm trying to start it, but I don't see how to do that. Oh, there we are. Okay, I'm not seeing that on my end of things, so am I controlling that? No? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't appear to. Sorry.
Yeah, Melissa, you should be able to control your own screen.
It doesn't appear under the presentation manager. Sorry. I'm not seeing the ability to do that. Not the way that I was shown that it would. I don't know if maybe.
Yes. I'm very happy to advance for you.
Great.
If you just tell me next slide.
Sure. Sorry about that.
No worries. Let's. I'm sure Resolve behind the scenes will help with that. So, can you see a slide that says About Health Canada now?
Oh yes, I see the slide. I just don't see it on the controls in the other screen. So if you're able to advance, then that would be
I will
great.
happily do that for you.
Thank you so much. Sorry about that. I'm really, really pleased to be here to talk about Project Orbis, which is really something that is very near and dear to my heart. Working at a smaller regulatory agency and having such a wonderful collaborative opportunity with the FDA. So I wanted to start with a couple of slides that would position kind of where we are in Health Canada, so sort of refocus to Canada. And this slide is just a very general slide to say that Health Canada regulates health products throughout their life cycle. And as many of you are well aware, we have a federal model of healthcare delivery along with provincial and territorial roles. So next slide, please. And I love this slide because it's so complex, and it really is meant to show the complexities in our healthcare system when it comes to healthcare delivery and access to medications. And it also shows that Health Canada is really just one cog in the wheel when it comes to that. So next slide, please. And this talks about what happens in the pharmaceutical management continuum pre and post market approval. And we have, over the last several years at Health Canada, been looking at what levers we have to help accelerate access to needed therapies for patients. And one of the things we've done is we've aligned our review as much as we can with the health technology assessment bodies so that we can really minimize the time between a Health Canada decision and the time between a reimbursement or formulary decision. Next slide, please. So international collaboration is not something new. There was a government commitment about 5 years ago to improve access and accessibility to prescription medicines. And two of the key pillars were expanding collaboration and more timely access to drugs and devices. So international collaboration is something, as Stephen said, we've been doing with our partners for many, many years. But one of the things we really wanted to do several years ago was to increase global alignment, expedite the availability of critical drugs to patients sooner, information share and discuss with our international partners as much as possible, as well as collaborate on review initiatives. So next slide, please. So thus was born the Regulatory Review of Drugs and Devices Initiative, and this really had the focus of access to medicines in Canada. And one of the key projects was international collaboration and work sharing and reviews. So there was a lot of work done at that time to build on our access consortium. So that's Australia, Canada, Singapore, and Switzerland. And just recently, as of last week, the MHRA in the United Kingdom as well. And so we built on that work sharing pilots and really formalized a process. So next slide, please. All right, so this is a poll, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to be able to launch it, but I will give it a whirl, and you can tell me if it's working. But I do just want to say before I try to launch the poll, that the Access Consortium was really the thing that caught Dr. Pastor's eye, and so I'll go into that in a moment. So I'm going to open this poll. I don't know if it's working because I can't.
Resolve has got the poll up.
Great. I think I'm controlling it actually.
Yes, there you go. Okay.
Great. Okay, so what I'm going to do is leave it open just for a couple more seconds. So please enter your answers because I'm very curious. And this is previous to, please answer as though you did not hear the FDA speak about Project Orbis. Okay, I'm going to close the poll now. And I don't see the results, but I'm going to try to show them. Are they popping up? I don't know that that's actually working. So I don't see any results, but that's okay. So we'll skip the poll for now, and then if we can figure it out, we'll launch it another time. I feel like I don't have control of things over here. If you could advance the slide, Anne-Marie, that'd be great.
There we go.
So I'm going to assume that many of you watching probably didn't know much, if anything, about Project Orbis, and that certainly is not a huge surprise. It's something that kind of came out of the blue, and we've been exploring for just over a year now, and it's really ramped up. So one of the things that was really exciting was that through our Access Consortium initiatives, we were able to catch the eye of Dr. Pazder in the US, who looked at the collaborations that we were doing, and then was able to sort of see the time to approvals. And he noted that there was quite a lag between when Health Canada was receiving an application or Australia was receiving an application and when FDA had received it. So we often talk about the metrics of the time that it was approved, but he noted that things were just not coming to these countries at the same time. And that was what spurred him to go on and move forward with Project Orbis. So I see Emery has left, so I'm hoping that my slides can get advanced. All right, great. So the first project was really exciting and came quite out of the blue, and we only had a few weeks to sort of mobilize the troops. We were approached to take part in it, and it was a 2-sponsor, 2-product, and 3 regulators. So it involved our sister directorate at the Biologics and Radiopharmaceuticals Drugs Directorate, as well as my own directorate and team. And so it was really exciting, but it also was an NOCC drug. And Stephen, you did accurately portray what conditional approval is in Canada, so no worries there. And it was also a real-time oncology review, which was also just discussed, and that is something that exists in the US and not in Canada, but does give kind of a head start. So it means that by the time the application came to us, they'd already had some time with some of the data sets. It also was piloting an FDA assessment aid, which was a review document that would collate all of the jurisdictions thinking around the application. So there was a lot of things happening at once, as well as us trying to navigate how to do this together. So there was a concurrent submission filing in each jurisdiction, but we all reviewed it separately. But we had lots of meetings, lots of conversations, and we also had to sort of build this plane as we were flying it. Next slide, please.
Melissa, can you advance your slides now? No. All right.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't actually tried.
Let me try there. Put it up for you for sure.
Okay, yeah, I don't seem to have control. Okay, so what was the impact of this particular project? We got it earlier in Canada, and I think significantly earlier. There were no plans to file that application at the time. We also got insight into the FDA process, and that really helped us understand the inner workings of the review at the FDA, which was really amazing, and it allowed us to have further collaborations. We also had access to resources and data analysis that we don't necessarily have in Canada. And so that was definitely a huge plus. There was also significant internal collaboration because there was an application in the biologics and the small molecules area. The review timeline was insanely condensed for us. So 90 days from filing to the time that we issued our QN, which was the same day as other jurisdictions issued our decision. So we definitely had an interesting dynamic in terms of review processes. So for us, when we issue a QN, it's not a decision necessarily, but it's the next step in our conditional approval process before we issue the NOC. So we had to sort of map that onto the other processes. We also had to deal with additional documentation. We still have an obligation to follow our internal processes, but we also wanted to work on this multidisciplinary assessment aid as well. And of course, a project like this that kind of comes out of the blue did have an impact on existing workload, planning, and review timelines. So that was an amazing success, and it led to this. So it led to that one approval led to many others in quick succession. And what had initially been billed as only for supplements quickly evolved into new drug submissions and involving our chemistry and manufacturing colleagues. So it expanded rapidly and it really was fantastic. So I think we've done amazing, and we have many projects ongoing under this the auspices of Project Orbis. So next slide, please. Oh, go back one. All right. So what has been our experience thus far? Each application is really like a snowflake. It's very unique. Many of them have condensed review timelines. However, we've recently sort of defined the different types of Project Orbis. And so the condensed review timelines tend to be those type A, where there's a concurrent filing in each jurisdiction. And we really want to have get the most out of the collaboration. And so in order to do that, we have to try to keep pace as best as possible. It's operating as a pilot to date, and I already mentioned sort of building that plane as we fly. I must say, I think it's almost built. We're really looking at operationalizing things in Health Canada as well as with the Project Orbis partners. We've certainly had to be agile in our approach to these applications. We really like our standard operating procedures and timelines and guidelines, and we really like to stick to those. But if you really want to do something as bold as this, you really have to look at where your flexibilities are. I already mentioned the additional documentation. And I think it resulted in tangible benefits. And it's really hard because these metrics are not something you can measure. We couldn't get into the mind of the applicant to know when they might have otherwise submitted to understand exactly what was gained. But we certainly had a very strong sense that these applications were coming to us far earlier than had been planned in by the sponsor. And then there was a whole bunch of fringe benefits as well. So next slide, please. All right. Oh, back one. Yeah, there we go. So one thing that has been amazing is the openness and transparency across the agencies that has allowed for a fruitful dialogue and a deep understanding of the decisions. And Stephen alluded to the fact that we were going to have a delegation from the FDA come up to Canada, and that is true. We were hoping to have them here in April and to talk about one of the ongoing applications. And I really lament the fact that it didn't happen, because I think we would have had even greater collaboration and relationship and understanding. But I'm hoping it'll happen in the future. We also had access to the resources and data analysis and broad expertise that we don't necessarily have in-house. We do not have 100 medical oncologists on staff. We have access to that kind of expertise, but it was really great to be able to ask them questions. One thing that we did find right from the beginning is sponsors, especially the sponsors participating in Project Orbis, were superbly excited about this. However, they really wanted clear operational processes, but we were operating really under a testing the system, so we didn't really have that to offer at the time. We hoped that it reduced duplicative questions to the sponsors for information requests because they were shared. So we hoped that we didn't manage to create abundance more work for the sponsors, but certainly having ongoing applications in each different jurisdiction is really tough for a sponsor to manage. And currently we're really refining these internal processes related to Project Orbis as much as we can, so that it can kind of be ingrained in our collective psyche, and we can be ready for the upcoming submissions. So next slide, please. All right, so this is something that a lot of sponsors have been asking. What is the criteria? What makes a Project Orbis? And this has been a relatively difficult question to answer. So candidates are put forward by the FDA. That is clear. They are the secretariat and the lead for this project. So all partners, however, then have the ability, as mentioned previously, to decline participation in the collaborative review. Of course, we would always welcome, separate submissions, but if unable to collaborate, we can say no. At the moment, Health Canada has not said no. The only ones we haven't participated in are the ones where the sponsor did not want to file in Canada at the moment. And we really wanted to do this so that we could gain as much experience as possible in and help refine the process. And I think we've succeeded in that. And we now have 3 types of Orbis submissions, and they really can be, tailored as needed. So many of the candidates that we've seen so far for Project Orbis would have been those that would qualify for priority review or NOCC, which makes sense. But not all of those things that might have qualified for accelerated review in the FDA, say, would necessarily come forward as a Project Orbis. So the partners are really looking to define future criteria. And there was a recent publication about Project Orbis, and it sort of talked a little bit more about the experience thus far. And now I say modified Project Orbis, but this is what we were calling the Type B and Type C Project Orbis prior to them having an official name. But this allowed us for another pathway for collaboration without concurrent review. And sometimes that's a little bit easier to manage from a sponsor's perspective as well as a regulatory perspective. And sometimes that does make sense. Next slide, please. All right, so if you're a Canadian sponsor considering Orbis, what do you need to know? They need to know that FDA is the central point of contact. Both drugs and new indications are now considered. That it could include review by multiple agencies, but maybe not necessarily all of them. So we also have, for instance, Tukysa was reviewed by the FDA, Health Canada, TGA, Swissmedic, and Singapore. And when the timing of submission files, you need to sort of think about the Type B and Type C. And we really, the earlier we know that something is coming our way from a regulatory agency perspective, the better. So it allows us to plan and allocate resources. And Canadian sponsors considering priority review or pre-submission meeting should contact Health Canada as soon as they can. So early notification is really a key for us to make it as successful as possible on our end. Next slide, please. So what's next? This is a fantastic framework for concurrent submission review and info sharing for oncology drugs. It encourages the earlier drug submission, supports faster review times while maintaining our standards, and also allows for sovereign decision making. And I do believe earlier access to therapies for patients. So we are continuing our discussions to solidify these processes, and we've had some successes, we've identified some challenges, and we're really looking to clearly articulate what this project is now that we're moving beyond that pilot phase. Next slide, please. And all of this is happening in what I'm calling the ecosystem of international collaboration within Health Canada. We collaborate on a number of fronts with a number of different agencies. They include the EMA, the MHRA, the World Health Organization, the International Coalition for Medicines Regulatory Authorities, etc. So Project Orbis is one of a number of fronts where we're looking to really take advantage of the international collaboration and contribute on the international stage. And so if you would like some more information, there's a link there to some of the activities that we're undertaking at Health Canada. Next slide, which I think may be my last one. I think it's a question, yeah. So thank you very, very much. And I'll now turn over to Barry to facilitate the moderated session.
Thank you so much, Melissa. And our apologies for the slide issues. These things sometimes happen. We do have the poll results if you would like to speak with them as well.
I'd love to see them. Yeah.
Yes. Floyd, I know you're working hard behind the scenes.
Oh, I clicked into the poll and I can see it now.
Great,
and so it
perfect.
Was about 60% were none, which is what I had guessed. Very little was 22%, and a little was 12, and only 3 participants identified as being very familiar. So that's not a surprise to me, and hopefully you now have a better sense of what this project means to Canada.
Right. Beautiful presentations, and Barry, we're right on time, so I'll pass it to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for Stephen and Melissa for 2 great presentations. Stephen, you answered 2 of my most burning questions, and the first one was that the FDA now has an expanded review for bagels, smoked meat, and barbecue chicken. Montreal at that, so that was great to hear. And secondly, no one, including myself, had any idea how the name Orbis came to be. So I guess the traveling and inclusion of all these other countries to Poland, I guess, and I guess we'll have to start looking at seeing Poland included in this process as well, was the answer to that question. So that was great to know. I do actually have a couple of questions, and then I guess we'll open it up to everybody outside who's watching this, so they can ask their questions as well. So my first question, I'll do it in order of Stephen and then Melissa. Given the fact that we're starting to see a globalization of approval of various drugs, how do you see this affecting clinical trials? Do you see standards being similar from nation to nation? And how do you see the incorporation of patient groups into that process?
I think for it's a challenging question, because especially looking at clinical trials, even in Europe, for example, the clinical trial regulation is at the country level rather than the EMA level. So I think the clinical trial aspect is even more challenging for sponsors, perhaps, than the review of the applications. Clinical trials are clearly being done globally now, and I think we're seeing less. Speaking for the United States, we're seeing less and less of these trials in the U.S. Maybe between 20 and 33% in U.S., probably a third in Europe, and a third in Asia. As we see more trials, it's difficult, because as we see more patients in Europe and Asia, we're seeing less underserved minorities being enrolled in the U.S., and that we find that to be problematic. It's hard. I see trials being more and more global, and not that they already aren't. But I'm not sure exactly how that'll affect as far as the regulatory side. As far as the second aspect was patient voice in the trials. Yeah, that's a good question. And at FDA, we're working on at least one aspect of that, which is patient-reported outcomes, and what are symptoms most important to patients related to the disease, as well as the toxicities, and that's what we feel is most important for our labeling. However, for example, in Europe, it's the HTAs that really drive which instruments are used, because they want to see certain instruments used to be able to fund the drugs at the end of the day. So, it's problematic for a patient to have to do, multiple different instruments, and just taking all the time filling out these in clinical trials. So we do have to be sort of realistic about, what we're asking of patients. I think it is important for patients to be involved, but it's a challenge, because there may be differences in the patient groups in U.S. versus Canada versus Asia versus, different European countries. So I think it is a challenge. I don't have a sense of what the best sort of path forward is at the moment.
Okay. In one of your slides, Stephen, you showed the larotrectinib, Dr. Hong's slide on larotrectinib, and my question is actually for Melissa now. Take an account of those type of drugs where there are basket trials, and we see a very effective results for some patients. How do you see that affecting the decisions downstream to the CADTH and to the ENES side, so PCODER and ENES in Canada? How do you see that affecting the HTA side?
That's a very good question. I don't think I can speak entirely for my HTA colleagues, but I know that has been a struggle. From a regulator's perspective, we look holistically at the data. and we render a decision based on safety, efficacy, and quality. We don't integrate into our review the idea of reimbursement or what this would mean in terms of that treatment relative to all the other existing treatments out there, the cost of testing, looking for the mutation, etc. All of those things do not factor into our regulatory approval or considerations for approval, which I think is appropriate. So I really think we do have our swim lanes, but it's a bit disheartening, from a regulator's perspective when you look at the data and you recognize that there's a huge hurdle after our decision in terms of patient access, because it was a basket trial, because you had handfuls of patients in some cancers that were included. And that's really a difficult decision for health technology assessment bodies, and I don't envy them there. It's been a huge challenge. So I don't know how we necessarily get over that, but I know there's lots of conversations that are happening in different forums about what kind of evidence generation in the post-market space might be required to meet the needs of the health technology assessment bodies and reimbursement decisions on the provincial formularies. So I know that those conversations are happening, but I'm not entirely dialed into all of them. So, but it's a very good point.
I do have many more questions, but I just want to be sure that we will have some time, Anne-Marie, to take in questions from the outside. So I'll just, while you're collecting those, and let me know if there are any, I'll just ask one follow-up question. So in both, as we look at the drug approval process, we're trying to eliminate a bottleneck in terms of the timelines from FDA approval and Health Canada approval, so the patients can get earlier access to some of these drugs. But of course, as we just discussed, there's some bottlenecks coming down the pipeline, so to speak, at the HTA side, price negotiation side, until the product is actually listed and available to patients. Do you foresee any opportunities for working together to eliminate those other bottlenecks downstream? And I'll leave that open to both of you, to whoever wants to answer.
I can start. I don't mind. Yeah, I mean, Health Canada only has limited levers in that space, but we certainly have worked to reduce that lag and share information. So one thing we're really encouraging sponsors to do is to opt in to the HTA aligned process, so that we really can share information, and they, Kadith and Ines can have a better sense of when an approval might happen, and they can sequence their review accordingly. One thing that Project Orbis has sort of disrupted a little is that HTA aligned process, because generally we had something that was relatively predictable, and then you kind of throw this in, and every Orbis project is different, the targets are different, they're not consistent, and put to that the idea that there's confidentiality agreements across the different jurisdictions. We can't apply our transparency pieces to Orbis in the way that we would if it was just a domestic initiative, because we have to take into consideration Singapore's transparency pieces and what they're allowed to do and say. So that has been a challenge for HTAs, and so that's why we've been really encouraging the aligned process, so that we can communicate, because they haven't been able to see these things coming as they normally would. They haven't been able to factor that into their conversations. PCPA can't factor that into their price negotiations, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something we're looking at trying to fix as much as we can. But it's been somewhat of a challenge for the Orbis projects. Outside of Orbis, we really are doing all that we can to collaborate with the health technology assessment partners to help them in their review. Again, there's certain things that we just don't have, any authority in. But I do know that there are those areas such as PCPA are that in and of themselves looking at ways to find efficiencies in the process.
Great. Stephen, did you want to add anything to that?
I guess with drug pricing in the U.S. is such a kind of hot button issue, I'll probably sort of defer that. As a patient myself, though, I think about this and what drug would be more important to me as a patient, especially having so many toxicities that I had, that a drug that only has a 6-week survival improvement in a randomized trial, but a lot of toxicity, I probably wouldn't have wanted to go through with a drug like that. Whereas a drug that has, it hasn't been able to demonstrate survival because they couldn't do a randomized trial in microsatellite instability with checkpoint inhibition, where you have patients who have complete responses for 3 years or 4 years, I think as a patient, you sort of want the chance to sort of have that, that drug. However, it hasn't been assessed in a randomized trial. So I think it's hard to assess. How do you assess benefit in these single arm trials? Well, clearly I think there is benefit there in a lot of these cases for patients, and especially when you have 70%, larotrectinib, 70% response rate with complete responses for 3 years. I mean, that's benefit, and it's just hard to quantify that. And but on the other hand, that's more important to me than sort of the very small survival benefit we've seen in some of these other trials.
Yeah, thank you for bringing your personal perspective to all of us. It really is appreciated. I know it's not easy, especially having a scan today. It's a little bit of pressure, I know that. Personally, that's for sure. But it's also great to know that you are providing that personal perspective, that from a patient point of view, to the FDA, and that is kind of integrated just coincidentally, but greatly appreciated into the whole process. Anne-Marie, did we have some questions for...
In fact, we do. And again, I want to encourage the audience to use the question buttons. We are tracking them. For both Stephen and Melissa, although Melissa, will start with you. There's a couple of questions about, let me call it, the role of patient groups in general as part of Project Orbis. So the questions fundamentally are, what today is the role of patient groups? What is the future role of patient groups is part of this project, and how can companies that want to engage with patient experts in parallel with Project Orbis participate in that? So I would ask Melissa for you to start that question, and Stephen, you may want to comment as well from a U.S. perspective.
Mm-hmm. Stephen actually answered a little bit of, what I might say to this as well in terms of patient involvement in clinical trials and the like. Where Project Orbis is concerned, it really is a regular, regulatory authority review. So the data is the data we would have got, but we would have got it 3 years after the FDA. So there's really nothing unique in that in terms of patient group involvement, other than the fact that we do consider the patient-reported outcomes, and it's something I think I spoke at last year at this conference, that we are encouraging companies to look at what the most meaningful measurements might be. Patient voice in drug review writ large is also something we are looking at in Health Canada, not in my area, but in a policy area. We're obviously looking very closely at what's happening with our neighbors to the south, who are doing some wonderful things in that area. In terms of guidelines for patient groups and companies, we know the patient voice is very important when it comes to the HTA reviews. So engaging them early would be really, really beneficial, I think. I don't think they necessarily mesh with the regulatory review, but we don't currently have any guidelines, nor would I really foresee any guidelines coming to industry around patient group experts being engaged in parallel with a Project Orbis, because Project Orbis is really just a framework for us to do the work that we've been doing for many, many, many years in collaboration with other health partners.
Thank you. Stephen, would you like to comment?
Yeah, just the only, officially with review of applications, it's a little challenging because there's this whole clearance process that, has to be done. So we don't always get, especially for applications that we find are, I'll say slam dunks where, it's so, it's such an important application that we just want to approve it, quickly for patient access. It actually would take longer to get patient involvement. That being said, we do have lots of, we have a lot of sort of informal mechanisms that we have interactions with patients. Like we have patient listening sessions. We had one with fight colorectal cancer earlier in the year. And we do a lot of workshops. So there's a lot of activities with Friends of Cancer Research. And we have, at ASCO every year, we have a patient advocate session at FDA. So we do a lot of these sessions to sort of get patient input. It's just not necessarily with each specific application.
Thank you. Barry, I will pass it back to you to close with final questions.
Sure. I always have an extra question or two in my pocket. And one of them is, how do you foresee the incorporation in terms of value frameworks starting for real-world evidence, starting at the regulatory level and working its way down through the system? Do you see coming up in the near future with a framework for the incorporation of real-world data? And I noticed that in one of the slides you had a CIHR agency who's already started to look into that. So I guess we'll start with Melissa on that and open it up to Stephen as well.
So real-world evidence is a kind of a passion project of mine. So it's not my real job, but it's something that I've been involved in for many years. I think we need to remember that you can't have real-world evidence until you have a product on the market that can generate that real-world evidence. So clinical trials are going to be the gold standard for product approval, as far as I can see. But I think there's lots of room to look at the collection of real-world data and turn it into evidence and integrate it into our decision making. There are a lot of limitations with real-world evidence. So we have to recognize that when you take it out of an uncontrolled environment and you manipulate data and databases, and you can't necessarily be sure that it was collected in the same way consistently. It is sometimes hard to make heads or tail of it, but I do see that pre-planned studies will probably come to us more and more in the medium term to do things like help with removing the conditional approval. So in addition to perhaps, the readout of their phase 3 trial, they might complement that with real world evidence. I see it really in the post-market space. It's been used there already, and I think we will ramp up, our involvement and integration of that data into that type of decision making. And I also want to highlight that real-world evidence is not new. It's something we've been seeing for many years. We have applications that have relied, on what I would consider mostly real-world evidence in the more rare disease space. And so we are not obstinate in our thinking about what we can do with that evidence, but it has to make sense. So in a place where you can get quality data that is through a clinical trial, that's really, I think, where we should, as regulators, be looking for first approvals. But I do think that there's a lot of openness and willingness to explore where the real world evidence will take us. I can't speak for the downstream partners, but in my 10,000 feet view of real world evidence for HTAs and payers, I think it could really show, you could really generate a lot of data and answer a lot of questions about the value in the Canadian healthcare system with that type of data. But it's just a question of getting there with methods, et cetera.
Right. I think that's going to be very important, especially when we have very precision medicines that are targeting smaller groups, and it'll be very hard to get big numbers from clinical trials. Stephen, how about yourself from the US side?
We don't really get at FDA. We don't get so much into value frameworks or pricing. We legally can't get into that. But as far as real world evidence, I think there's also opportunities there with respect to a lot of the clinical trials are done in sort of pristine patients, whereas a lot of times the companies aren't enrolling as many of the older patients or poor performance status patients, and so hopefully some of this real world data will give us opportunities to really evaluate these drugs in different groups of patients who might not have been studied in the clinical trials.
Well, thank you so much both for wonderful presentations and answering those questions so candidly. Anne-Marie, back to you.
Thank you very much. And if you, Melissa, there was one final question based on some comments that did come through, and we do have a moment. The question was really about clarification on the application approval process and something that you had said around pricing. And looking for some clarification from a pharmaceutical or drug company perspective on the rules or guidelines around pricing as part of the submission process. If you could just clarify that.
Yep, certainly I can do that. I mean, I think it gets confused because the Patent Medicines Prices Review Board is a pseudo-federal agency that sets ceiling prices for therapies in Canada. And that's to make sure that there's the drugs that we have out in Canada are priced fairly. That said, that has nothing to do with the regulator. So they are a regulatory body in and of themselves, but Health Canada, our mandate is to approve safe, effective, and quality medicines. So pricing does not come into play when it comes to a regulatory decision as to whether or not a drug should be granted a notice of compliance in Canada.
Right.
I think
Thank
that
you very much.
probably covers it.
All right. Thank you so much. And with that, we want to thank Stephen and Melissa for very fine presentations. Thank you so much for just your openness in sharing information around Project Orbis and the need for smoked meat somewhere in the U.S. We're going to take a moment for our education break. We'll be back. This allows people to stand up and stretch for a moment. Please don't go away from your computers. Come on back in 1 moment. Thank you.
Mom. Come on. Mom.
We come from different places. We look different ways. We live different ways.
We love different ways.
Seriously, bacon?
We're coming. All right, let's go.
We worship different ways.
But there's much that we all share.
One shared commitment to one shared calling.
To bring the boldest, brightest thinking to the search for life-saving cures.
Built on one shared understanding of the power of science.
We are the many daring, different people at Pfizer.
All driven by one shared goal.
All driven to discover the cure.